Hello and welcome to the Project Good podcast. I'm your host, Anne Marie Hilton. Project Good is a social impact podcast interviewing experts and advocates about the pressing problems that we face globally and hearing how they suggest we move forward in the future. The Project Good podcast is brought to you by Project Good Work. The goal of this podcast is to inspire people and organizations to develop a mindset that can move others to positive action regarding the complex social issues facing people on the planet. For July, we have a special edition from the Center for Counsel. Today, I have the pleasure of interviewing Jared Seide, who's the Executive Director of Center for Counsel. He has designated, piloted, and coordinated counsel-based programs in prisons, assisted living facilities, youth groups, and a variety of nonprofits, faith-based organizations, social service, and law enforcement agencies. Let's get into the interview. During the 2020 pandemic, the death of George Floyd placed a microscope on law enforcement in the U.S. and changed how we think about progress in the U.S. The world has been in a state of chaos since the start of the pandemic, and many people wonder what can be done and how can we make a change. The Center for Counsel is an organization that has worked with around 20 prisons throughout California and is the winner of the American Correctional Association's Innovations in Corrections Award. The Training Leadership Initiative, supporting emerging counsel leaders serving impacted communities, and the counsel-based Peace Officer Wellness, Empathy, and Resilience program called POWER for law enforcement and correctional officers. The organization is paving the way for change in this important area. Today, I have the pleasure of speaking with its founder, Jared Seide. Welcome, Jared.
Thank you so much, Anne Marie. I appreciate it.
So before we get into the questions, I always like to find out why somebody became the person that they are today. So I guess you took what you do is interesting. I guess, how did you go from, I guess, a young person and then, of course, a young man? I guess, what drew you to do what you do currently?
Oh, gosh. Wow. I grew up, that's a big question, but I grew up in a New York that does not exist anymore. It was an extraordinary place. It was before crack and before, it was pre-AIDS. It was a whole different era of New York. And I was a kid growing up there. I was interested in the arts. I became an actor and fell in with a crowd of folks who were part of the original version of Fame, if anyone remembers the movie Fame. Mm-hmm. I had a manager, and I did commercials and soap operas and a lot of theater. And, New York was kind of a mess. It was exciting and sketchy and magical and intimate and loud and honest. You just encountered a lot of folks all the time. And I was a sort of awkward and shy kid. I loved performing because it gave me a chance to sort of find a character to inhabit inside a story, I guess. And it felt right. It felt like I had a story to tell, just as all the people I was encountering in the streets of New York. And there was a magic to that place. It made me really want to tell stories. It made me want to build community through the encounter of really listening to another's story, whether it's something you do in the theater or at the movies or just having conversations. There was something really extraordinary about the diversity of folks that I was surrounded by that I think drew me into that. It's very leveling and unifying and affirming of our common journey as humans. And so I pursued it, and I became an actor and then a director and a writer. And I went to England and studied classical theater and wound up in Hollywood in Los Angeles. And realized quickly that authenticity was not the thing that was, paying the big bucks. It felt like the work that I was doing that actually paid was stuff that felt very inauthentic and derivative and silly. And the stuff that was really about storytelling was really hard to pay rent with. So I was in a bit of a dilemma. I had a daughter at the time who was in fourth grade, around just after the Rodney King riots, and a lot of unrest in LA. And as a very involved parent in a public school, I was watching a community that was dear to me falling apart, really becoming very dangerous. Lots of bullying and suspicion and defensiveness, kids, parents, teachers, community members. And we had heard that there was a practice of storytelling that was emerging in schools, that was sort of coming in to take the place of the social emotional learning programs that were being defunded, the arts programs and such. And it was really about bringing folks together to tell their stories, beyond their opinions and their debates and their, kind of gossiping. We tried it at this school, and it was an amazing experience where, just like I had felt, growing up and being in shows and plays as a kid, here was a way to bring a group of folks together who disagreed and maybe bickered with each other until they stepped into this space where each person could talk about, their dreams and the stories of their life, something that they remember about their grandparent or a crush growing up or their favorite cartoon when they were a kid. And all of a sudden we saw each other as humans, as full humans who loved their kids and wanted a community that was safe and that would be of benefit. And I had heard this concept of beloved community. Dr. King would talk about beloved community and what it meant to be a diversity of folks where everyone could come together and be seen and feel valued and receive the care that they need. And here, this was emerging right in my daughter's school, and I fell in love with it. It was way more interesting and inspiring than the work I was doing in Hollywood, and I decided I would turn towards it and learn how to do it and figure out what schools it was in, and beyond schools, what we might do with this very simple practice of coming together as a group of people and telling your story. And also at the same time, creating an environment where folks could really listen to one another and offer regard and not have to debate or kind of get caught in all the things that we disagree about, but recognize how much we have in common. And it took over my life. It became the thing that I felt I just needed to do. There was a great need, not only in schools around Los Angeles, but in community-based organizations, in law enforcement, with businesses. And in California at the time, the prisons were incredibly overcrowded, built for 120,000 folks. They were at, capacity of 200,000 plus crammed into these prisons. And so California was trying to find ways to bring folks who'd served their sentences back into community. And they needed some way to organize rehabilitative programs. And it seemed like an opportunity for us to step up and create something as a community-based organization that would give individuals who had, paid their debt to society skills they needed to come home in a good way and reenter society. So it was obvious that there was a great need in all kinds of sectors, and I decided that this would be my life. And very quickly we found that there were a lot of resources and a lot of interest, and over the course of 10, 15 years, it has expanded to be a very powerful and robust organization that serves thousands, tens of thousands of folks, and inspires a lot of other programs around the world. So I'm thrilled to have woken up to this great need for social connection and have a capacity to organize a nonprofit organization that brings these skills forward. That's a long answer, but that's a journey.
Yes, no, but I like that you explained the journey because, it kind of speaks to, not to be silly, but to the work that you do, that it is a journey, I guess, to get to the core of each individual and to come at them at a different angle. I like that you started your career out in, I would say, the arts, right? Acting
Yeah.
and because of that, learning the value and the appreciation of a story. And and then how that then tied to everything else of how then you I've only taken one acting class and I was horrific. So being able to, one of the things that I remember though is like being able to really dive in and understand a character and getting to see their perspective,
Hmm.
is definitely well, it's not a common skills, right? Because not everybody's an actor.
Right.
We all wish we could be, but or I guess not all of us, but a good amount.
Hmm.
um, and really dive in and to understand how another person is thinking. So a very unique way to get to a totally different thing that you're doing, but in a way still the same.
Yeah. My daughter struggles with it sometimes because she saw, dad as somebody who was part of the entertainment industry, and it was fancy and there were movies and premieres and things to do. And then all of a sudden, he's going into prisons and he's, off to Rwanda and he's doing stuff, and it seems so different in some ways, but really it is that extraordinary power of storytelling and of regard. It's what was very much a part of what drew me to, wanting to be part of storytelling as an actor and a director. And it really is the core of what we do at Center for Counsel. It's in the core of the practice. It is, how it is that, listening attentively and speaking authentically gives us the capacity to connect and create relationships that lead to compassion. It's hugely, profound and far-reaching, and in some ways, it's what I've always done.
Yes, I guess we'll start at the beginning, because I think one of the things that at least, I know a lot of people these days, because it became popular, especially during the pandemic, because you were, locked in your box,
Mm.
that therapy became, a popular word. But then now you have this word counsel. So what is counsel?
It's a great question, and thank you. It's a bit confusing because there are two words in the English language. One is spelled Council, and the other is Counsel, and they mean very different things. Counsel is not counseling. Counsel is this practice of coming together to speak authentically and listen from the heart. The word counseled is derived from concilium, which is a Latin word that was used by Benjamin Franklin when he was invited to see the Haudenosaunee folks, who were the people of the Longhouse, practicing in this community building way. He knew Latin, and he said, "Oh, this is concilium. This is council. That means a gathering of people, and this is a gathering where everybody is valued." And so that's sort of where that word came from. I think it was a sort of a European-oriented white guy who knew Latin, looking at a practice that he didn't quite understand and trying to come up with a word for it. And it's an imperfect word, but it is a practice that is so common throughout the world. And as I've traveled, I've recognized the practice called many different things. In Africa, in Rwanda, the folks recognize it as Ibiraramo, which is where the elders would get together around a big vat of banana beer and take a straw and sip it and talk one at a time. In Sierra Leone, it's called Fumble Talk. In other parts of Africa, Dare, or Ho'oponopono in Hawaii, or Ma'agal Hakshavah in Hebrew traditions, Dare and Loya Jirga. Quakers practice like this. When we sit and listen, when we speak one at a time from the heart, and we listen without judgment, something extraordinary happens. We set aside what we think we know, and we discover maybe what's outside our comfort zone about ourselves and each other. And it really is predicated on this ability to listen and speak from the heart, to be curious and hear the words of the person with an open-heartedness that we don't often extend to people who don't look like us, or don't come from the same place, or maybe don't vote for the same person we voted for, or don't worship the way we do, or love the way we do, or come from the same class. We tend to make a lot of judgments, and our listening to others is really conditioned by who we think they are. And often that robs us of the opportunity to see how much we have in common with folks, even if it's a diversity of folks. And even if they're not people we agree with, something amazing happens when we give ourselves permission to listen without judgment, like we listen to, nature, the sound of the waves at the beach. We don't have to agree or disagree with the waves. We can just listen, and we understand about the surf or the birds, tweeting. We're not We don't have to have an opinion and agree with the bird to appreciate the sound of their chirping. So something about that quality of listening is really kind of magical. And similarly, when we allow ourselves to speak in such a way that we're really giving voice to what's alive in us, not the story we think we have to tell or what we have always told or what people told us we should tell, but really what's alive in the moment. That permission to be our authentic self with a group of people, knowing that they've come to really just listen without judgment, is a really transformative and beautiful community building process that gives us this hit of social connection that is so critical to our well-being, and that enables us in a group of folks to find our voice and to recognize things about others that we might not have seen had we just judged them based on what we see on the outside. In many cases, we've made decisions about I'm with you, I'm against you. It's you're one of them. Oh, I can't really listen to what you have to say because I hate you already because of what I know you've done out in the world. These are really destructive tendencies we have to make these kind of snap judgments, and it robs us of so much ability to create relationships and to create community, to build trust and to create the conditions for compassion to arise. And again, it doesn't mean we're agreeing with everybody in the world. It just means we're creating a civil and a respectful and an authentic space to come together. Council, I think you could think of it as a structure of belonging, really. It's a place we arrive where we just have to be ourselves and others agree to listen and everyone gets a chance to have a voice. And it has been really transformational in the places we have brought it, into schools, in prisons, and organizations, and tech firms, and finance, as well as law enforcement, and with first responders, including doctors and nurses who are extraordinarily overwhelmed by the stress they face. What an incredible relief to be able to come to a place where you can really be your true self with others who are there to just listen, and everyone gets a chance. So in a nutshell, that's kind of what Council is, and our organization is really organized to bring these programs out into the world in a way that's of value.
I love it because it is of course, when you started the organization, you know obviously listening is always important, but we are in a people have so many different names for it now. Some people are like, we're in the pivot, we're at the tipping point, we're
Yeah.
starting Armageddon. We're in the end days. There's so many
Yeah.
different names now, right?
Right. Right.
It's this is like so critical. It is like what I'll say. It's essentially our oxygen for our
Mm-hmm.
society, right?
Mm-hmm.
That
Mm-hmm.
we need to have that time to listen, because if we don't right now, I don't know if we can, I don't mean to be doomsday, but I don't know if we can move on successfully, because we're at 8 billion people now, right? Probably a
Mm-hmm.
little bit more because, every day somebody's born.
Mm-hmm.
So now we are at, a critical time that we have to kind of make a decision of, who we are and how we plan to move forward. And so, there's so many issues. It's overwhelming. I'm sure you feel that sometimes. You're like, oh my goodness, I just dealt with this, and now this and this and this and this. And so to have that ability to know, okay, the core, even if we have 8 billion problems, and I'm because at least everybody has some kind of problem going on, that we can narrow those problems down, or maybe not narrow them down, but get them under control if we just sit and we listen to each person and get their perspective, which could then, um, I guess, help us not always get to a solution, because some of these problems are just, we're not going to solve them, um, but just to understand where somebody is coming from, and their experience and their perception, makes a difference that, in your results has been profound, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
And so I guess where we are today, right? I'm like, I have so many different ways I could go with what you have just said. We find ourselves in a time of, I would say that, of confusion, right?
Hmm.
I don't know how
Hmm.
else to put it. We find ourselves in confusion, times of violence, and I guess you just say monumental change. So with all these things that are, I guess, pushing up against us, and with all the different situations that you have dealt with, I guess, how do you make this that it's digestible for each person? Because I would think that, this is just my opinion, I could be wrong, but like when you have your meetings, that people just come in and they feel heavy. There's like a billion things
Hmm.
pushing on them, and they're just like, okay, now, how is this really going to push us forward? So how do you approach some of these like really complex problems and make it, feel achievable to people, or that they can
Yeah.
make a
Yeah.
difference?
And accessible.
Hmm.
Absolutely. It's a great question. And it is, it's sort of my life's work at this point. And I appreciate your framing of this. I'll go back to what you were saying about the sort of end times, Armageddon talk. It's really rough out there, I will say. And having traveled a great deal and seen, I've spent some time in Auschwitz, which is where Auschwitz is in Poland, and to sit on the tracks, on the selection platform, and to really be there, to go into the children's barracks and the ash pond and the crematoria, and to be with a group of people who are, not the children, but the grandchildren of folks who were there, who had experienced either being, the victims, survivors, or even the folks who were assigned to work there. The guards who were dropping the cans of Zyklon B into the showers. There's such trauma that is carried generationally, and I will say, third generation, fourth generation trauma. We are moving in a direction as a culture that is not that different from things that have happened in places like Auschwitz and like Rwanda and like Bosnia Herzegovina, even tribal lands here in the States. Our own history is sort of checkered in terms of how we have perpetrated enormous violence on folks we consider to be the other. It's the problem is them. It's us and them, and they are the problem because they are whatever they are, because they belong to the group that we have decided is the one causing all the problems. And so, there's a cycle, and it begins with, a lot of messaging and propaganda and stuff in the news. And, people start kind of whispering, and then there are little kind of acts of aggression, and then those get a little worse. And then all of a sudden there are acts of violence, and then there are laws, and it's a slippery slope. So I just want to underline that we are experiencing things that have led to real tragic circumstances around the world. We are hearing things and experiencing our culture, whether you're listening to news that comes from a right-wing source, and you're hearing about the libs and the sort of Antifa kind of problem, or you're listening on the other side to MSNBC and you're hearing about the MAGA people. And there's this vilifying of the other as being not just the people you disagree with, but monsters who are creating the end days for our whole civilization. And that has really worked us up around this idea that we have to really hate the other. Very, very dangerous. And I think the antidote to that is listening to the other and realizing, you know what? They're not that different. If you hear their story and if you ask some questions and give them some containment, where we're not debating philosophy or policies, we're just hearing their story. Barack Obama, before he was even a senator, as a community organizer, he would have these town meetings. And this was a story told by Joshua Dubois, who was his head of faith-based initiatives. He said Obama would bring folks together in a town meeting, and he wouldn't ask them, like, what do you think about the policy around XYZ? He'd say, Tell me a story about how the healthcare system has affected your family, or how the conflict overseas and military service has affected your family. And when you get people talking about their personal stories, you can't agree or disagree. I mean, you can not listen, but it's their story. And when you go to the story, when you go to the essence of what they're experiencing, it's just a question of whether you have the capacity and the generosity to take a moment to listen, because it's not necessary for you to debate it out. It's just their story. And so counsel really brings us to that point where we're focusing on being present and paying attention and engaging with folks who have come together to really share some of who they are. And listening is a kind of shorthand for that. There's a physiological level on which listening is a function of a nervous system that is primed to be discerning and relational and reasonable, as opposed to being defensive and combative and evasive. That is a dysregulation of our nervous system, our autonomic nervous system, called sympathetic, tone or sympathetic overdrive. It's the fight, flight, freeze response, and we are in that space so much of the time. We're worked up, and our anatomy, our physiology is driving us to the place where we are not listening, and we're not being discerning, we're not being relational. We're seeing a uniform and freaking out, or we're hearing, words "I can't breathe" and not even understanding what they mean. We lose our capacity to be relational human beings when we allow ourselves to be worked up in this way. And our prefrontal cortex is there to bring us back into a kind of ability to be relational again. It regulates this nervous system. We don't use it a lot. It's what happens when, we listen to another, or when we pay attention to the present moment. When your mom told you, you're so upset, count to 10. It was a neurological intervention to tell you to bring on, this abstract thought of numbers, because you'll activate your prefrontal cortex. And when you do that, you'll be back in your right mind, and you can actually see the people around you and the situation with some discernment. When we lose that capacity, when we're constantly in this dysregulated state, we're headed for violence. We're headed for all kinds of disruptive and antisocial behaviors. And our current condition is one in which we've got that, if it's an accelerator and a brake, the sympathetic and the parasympathetic nervous system, we got the accelerator down most of the time, and we don't really know how to hit the brakes. So we tend to move through the world with a lot of stress and a lot of dread, and a lot of distraction from what's right in front of us. And when we stop and listen, when we stop and pay attention, we bring on a kind of a regulation. That, coupled with being connected to others, is a critical nourishment for being a healthy person. And I think, just to say one more thing, and I think this is important, we have, America's doctor, our Surgeon General, Dr. Vivek Murthy, is extraordinary on the point of this epidemic we are experiencing of social disconnection and loneliness. We are, as a nation, isolated and lonely. Over 50% of the population experiences that, and it is a critical component of our health, not just our social health and social well-being, but we are making ourselves sick. In fact, the latest advisory says it is akin to smoking 10 to 15 cigarettes a day, is what we're doing to our health by being disconnected and being kind of siloed off. It is hurting us. It's leading to addiction and mental health issues and violence and all kinds of other destructive social conditions, as well as real physical health implications for individuals. And it's great to have science on our side now. We know it feels good to be relational in community, but now we've got the nation's doctor showing us how our physiology is being really messed up by isolating ourselves and by not connecting with others and having the capacity to tell our story. So I think we've got the wind at our back, and I think we've, we're making an important case now about how we need to stem the tide of this isolation and this sense of disconnection by bringing people together to be able to tell their story and listen to one another. It's a really critical time to do that on all kinds of levels. Now,
one of the things, that I loved about Center for Counsel is that you take a holistic approach. So you're looking at everything, and you just, you kind of just mentioned it right now with everything you were saying about, it's not just about, you know, people being angry about an issue. It's actually become infiltrated into who they are, and it's now affected them. Not only from I'm upset about my candidate didn't win, or they took away this law, but it's like now everybody that is that was either for the other candidate now becomes my enemy. I then have to go
Mm-hmm.
into a protective mode.
Mm-hmm.
I now have to change where I go because they, hang out at the places
Yeah,
that,
yeah.
and it starts to become, who they are essentially. And so I like that the fact that you are trying to, peel back the onion and get back to each person's core. And so one of the things, though, that is, I guess, nerve wracking in this current society is saying what you feel, like really saying
Mm-hmm.
what you feel. And so, why, I guess, why have we, and this didn't just happen overnight, I guess, why are we afraid to tell people how we really feel in this society?
Yeah, it's a great question. The first thing I'd like to say about that is I would never start a council by saying, how do you feel about it? Don't talk about your feelings. I think that immediately sets people on edge. We ask folks to tell a story, and when they tell a story from their life, something emerges that isn't about therapy. It's therapeutic, but it really isn't about let's get into sort of indulging in this kind of ruminating place where we're just describing emotions. We're really talking about the things that have happened in our life that have led us to this place. And I've got to say that it's understandable. I mean, it's an act of great vulnerability to share of yourself in this way, particularly if you feel that you're in an environment that is not necessarily aligned. If you're not in your club and you're in group and you're being asked to be vulnerable, it can be dangerous to you. We work in prisons where we, as a condition of these groups, bring together folks who are rival gang members, who are, groups who are on the yard. And I'm not talking about kind of what they call Prisonland, this sort of like easy prisons. I'm talking about maximum security, level 4, lifers who are active on the yard in gangs, and there are stabbings and killings every day, and folks are opposed to one another because they align with this gang or that gang, and in prison that is a justification for for violence. When they come into the space of counsel, this structure, there is this incredible act of courage in telling the story of your life. When you begin to talk about where you come from and the story that defined you, and you see in the eyes of others who are just there to listen the sense of recognition, like, oh man, that's my story. You're telling my story. I'm feeling you in a way that I shouldn't feel you because you're the enemy, but here I am experiencing something as I listen to you. And that sort of act of courage in sharing that way invites someone else to share as well. Brene Brown talks about this a great deal, that there's, that all acts of courage boil down to vulnerability, and yet we don't train in vulnerability. We often find that people are very uncomfortable with vulnerability, but vulnerability leads to trust. When we share something true about ourselves and our story, it encourages others. We create a vulnerability loop, as Daniel Coyle says. He's got a great book called The Culture Code about high-performing organizations and groups, that there is this extraordinary emergence of trust that follows vulnerability. And we often think it should be the other way. It's like when you trust people, you can be vulnerable. Well, I think the science is showing us when you're vulnerable, then you trust. And so the vulnerability comes in asking folks to tell a story that maybe is a personal story that you're usually not asked to tell. Not to give, analysis of, why you're angry, or, your deepest, darkest wounds, or, what makes you, keeps you up at night. And, we're not going to trauma. We're not therapists here. We're asking folks to tell a story of something that's up for you. And in doing that, we see the emergence of this extraordinary embodiment of compassion. And when you're listened to, and when somebody actually takes the time to take you in and you see in their eyes the resonance, there's something just infectious about it. It feels good. It feels good to be seen and heard, and it encourages you to lean in and share a little bit more. And what we see as we do these programs, certainly in prisons, is that extraordinary transformation happens in a group of folks who've never been invited to be their true, authentic self. They all of a sudden come every Tuesday night or whatever night it is, and they sit in these council circles and they tell these stories, and they realize they're so much more than what society has told them they are. And this sort of CDCR number they carry around that's less than human, just as the numbers on the wrists of the folks in Auschwitz, or the markings that have delineated people who have been made the other in societies. The council circle enables us to recover our full humanity, our real story. And that is something you need to be skillful in introducing. You don't just start with something real heavy. You have a skillfulness in the container building, because it is a container, the structure of belonging I talk about. There is a certain amount of a ritual involved in that. We know, if you're a sports team, you huddle up, and then you have a, 1, 2, 3, go team. There's there are cues that remind us that this is where we belong, and we're in it together. We are a unit together. And then the invitation to tell a story, and when you're not speaking, to really listen, to understand and be curious, has this extraordinary impact. I think once folks experience it, you just have to come back. You just feel like, I need this in my life. This is the place where I'm truly who I am. This is where I can emerge as the best version of myself. And I can recognize people that I had written off as being valuable. And I feel the connection. And, it's cheap, it's affordable. It's, you don't need to, pay a therapist to do it. You just need to create this opportunity, and folks take care of this container in such a way that it benefits everybody. It becomes a real nourishing and generative area for inviting us to find that true voice and to help each other along in something that doesn't exist in other places in our lives in many cases. And so if you do it in your family or in your workplace or in a school classroom, or even in a prison or a police precinct, it's available to you, and there's no stigma around it being, group therapy, or, the place where broken people go, or something, or a AA meeting or something that is, requires that you identify as somebody who is broken. You just come as you are, and it has an incredible impact on how you feel about yourself and how you feel about the folks you're in it with.
Now, I like that you took the approach of take the feelings out and tell a story, because as far as I'm a National Geographic junkie, and I like to go into history. So I guess from caveman days and maybe beyond, whatever we were doing before we got to the cave, that people like to sit around and tell stories, and and stories were the way that you teach young children different things. So the story is so important because it gets us to listen. Versus when we're in lectures, or all these other things that we could be a part of, but stories draw us in. That's why, of course, we love movies and all of those types of entertaining stuff. And so I wanted to dive into for you to tell me about the Center for Counsel's Peace Officer Wellness, Empathy, and Resilience. I guess you would call it the Power Training Program.
Yes.
To tell us a little bit about it, how you came to, I guess, develop it, and what it does.
Yeah, thanks for asking about it. I've been talking about this work in prisons. We're actually in 29 prisons now around California. So there's thousands of folks who are learning these practices. They're bringing them to their families. They're doing them on the yard. When guys walk out of a meeting like this who are, just sort of clearly enemies, being friendly and talking to one another and taking a walk around the yard. It changes the conditions on the yard in a really remarkable way. And these folks are coming home. 95% of them are coming back into the neighborhood. And it's really important that something happens in there that gives them tools and skills and a vision of the kind of life they want to live when they return. I had a lot of work in these prisons for a while and saw this transformation and was so moved by it. And I noticed that the correctional officers were very resistant and sometimes kind of brutal. There were incidents on the yard where they'd come in screaming and yelling and pushing people around. And the folks inside had realized that, if you're gonna survive in there, you're gonna have to listen to what they have to say. And there was a real sense of, why are they acting so, inhumanely when guys here are trying to make a change in their lives? I had that thought at first, and then when I kind of paused, I realized that they're under an enormous amount of stress. And in many instances, all they've got, like they say, all they got is a hammer, so everything looks like a nail. They have these skills for controlling chaos, and they use them, but the amount of stress they're under and the amount of fear they're experiencing and the amount of pain they're in, having to do things that wrap them up in all kinds of moral distress, and the burnout that is engaged in, doing this high stress work, it made me feel like, there are systems that dehumanize and everybody needs resources. There was a time where there was a great deal going on in terms of officer-involved shootings and excessive use of violence. And there was a movement to be sort of punitive about that. And I sort of felt like that's a really inappropriate way to deal with law enforcement that's under-resourced. You got to look, upstream at what the training looks like with folks to understand what's happening downstream in communities or in these inappropriate behaviors that are so harmful. Folks are not being taught how to take care of themselves. Folks are not being taught what it is to go into a profession where, you are surrounded by this landscape of suffering, as my friend Rich Gerling says, by constant stressors from incident to incident, from watch to watch, and you don't have the skills to turn off that stress. You're in this sympathetic overdrive all the time. And, the maladaptive way of dealing with that is, get a couple or 10, shots of tequila or, be violent or hypersexuality and all kinds of ways that folks deal with their stress that are not actually dealing with their stress. It's actually making it worse. It's masking it. But they find themselves in this situation as law enforcement officers, including correctional officers, where they are giving up what by some studies is 20 to 22 years of their life just by joining this profession. I mean, these are not in the line of duty deaths. These are stress-related deaths that, you make it to retirement and you're just a wreck. So at 59, before you see your 60th birthday, you're having a heart attack, you're having early onset Alzheimer's, you're having a stroke. There are all kinds of health conditions that are impacting them, and they're not even getting to see retirement. This is absolutely untenable and unconscionable. And I think that if we're going to, entrust folks with the public safety, of our communities, we can't deprive them of the skills that they need to function through this very difficult terrain. And not only do we understand what happens in terms of the outcomes in communities, and they are bad, but we understand what happens to their health. And President Obama had a task force on 21st century policing that laid out 6 pillars about building trust and legitimacy and officer wellness and all kinds of things. Central in that is, this concept of procedural justice, of how officers listen to communities and how communities feel that they are seen and listened to. Not necessarily that, the police are agreeing with them, but just that they feel seen. And this is not a skill that's taught. And so we were able to get a grant to start to experiment with this. Our first project was with the Los Angeles Police Department. We wound up training 7 cohorts of about 25 officers, and remarkable things happened. It didn't happen at first. They didn't show up all excited about this. There was a lot of eye rolling and crossed arms and, we're going to hold hands and sing Kumbaya. What's all this? And then at the same time, I don't need counseling. I'm fine. because there's a lot of stigma in that. But what happened as we began to talk about what's going on in the autonomic nervous system, how it is we can interrupt this stress response, how it is we can manage it to some extent, and how it is we can understand how our discernment is affected by being dysregulated, and what it means to take a breath on that traffic stop when you see it going sideways, and understand if you take a breath and step back, you might get a different kind of outcome than what might happen if you just allowed yourself to tumble into this cascade of dysregulation. This is grounded in these officers coming together on their own and sitting in council. We call them huddles. They huddle up in council, and they do it once a week. And what they get out of these sessions together, and they're self-facilitated, we teach them how to do it, and they do it on their own, is just remarkable. What I'm excited about, I think, in this is not only their testimonials, and we've got a video on our website where you can hear them talking about what they got out of it. It's really surprising and wonderful. But the surveying we've been doing, the pre and post surveys, the quantitative data, and now the biometric data, that really gives us a chance to look at the physiology, what's happening with heart rate variability, coherence, and how is it that, what we're seeing over the course of the 3 months they're doing our program is changing health outcomes, is creating, measurable differences in their health profile. So in many cases, they don't have to take their blood pressure medicine anymore. And their doctors are saying, why are you so healthy? What are you doing differently? And what they say is, I'm paying attention, and I'm sitting with my peers, and once a week we drop in, and it feels really, I leave there feeling lighter, and my wife tells me I'm a nicer person. My kids want to hang out with me. And, I feel like offering this kind of resource to law enforcement is so critically important, both in terms of their sustainability and health, but in terms of the way they meet the community. And it was only possible to see that because we were doing essentially the same program inside prison with, folks with life sentences having the same kind of impact. And I had this aha moment in doing this program that everybody needs this, and everybody will be served by it. So this Peace Officer Wellness, Empathy, and Resilience, or POWER is the acronym. The program was certified in California as something that is accredited for officers. They need a certain number of these points every year to be recertified. And now it's accredited across the nation. It's nationally certified, so agencies across the country are able to take advantage of this program, which is really exciting. We have a partnership with the Department of Justice now, where we are working together to increase law enforcement awareness of the intersectionality of wellness, compassion, procedural justice, and community building. It's science-based, but it's also about understanding the critical importance of social connection, and teaching a whole range of practices and tools for officers to, maintain their health and well-being, and also manage things like empathy, fatigue, and moral distress, and the depersonalization and burnout. And the last thing I'll say is, it's not just police officers. It's doctors, it's nurses, it's firefighters, it's EMTs, it's folks who work in high-stress professions where, around every corner there's a crisis. And we put ourselves in this fight, flight, freeze mode. And, it's really important when it's go time, when you have to do something where that's required, but it's really dangerous to your health to stay there. And we often don't know how to come off of that. And these techniques, counsel, mindfulness, breathing, understanding the autonomic nervous system, these are all ways we can create healthy cyclicity in our autonomic nervous system, and not only feel better and, be more positive in our relationships with the community, but live longer and be healthier. So I'm thrilled to be able to do it. And I feel like it's what the world needs. It's certainly what folks who are under stress need, just to give them the resources to retain their health, to thrive, to feel good about their work, and for communities to appreciate what they do rather than resent them and cause more strife.
I love this approach, because you are one of the things I think, well, I'm sure not only you, but police, everybody is, the face of law enforcement, specifically in the U.S. Um, has gotten a negative rap, right? And so, that's added stress, I would assume. I'm not a police officer myself, but I would assume that's added stress along with the daily job that now, you have the horrible job of what I'll call, this is like way back when, being like the hall monitor that everybody didn't like, right?
Mm-hmm.
And
Right.
having that as your, image out there has to add, even additional stress to the job. So it's nice that you are working to work from an internal perspective with each of the officers, and then helps them to reach the community in a different way, deal with their daily lives, and not take so much home, because
Mm-hmm.
it's got to be a heavy job, I guess. I'm sure you've talked to officers individually. What are some things that you have found, like what don't people know about what it's like to be a police officer?
As I said, we managed to capture some of the sharing that they did when they feel comfortable sharing, and it's on our website. And I would encourage folks to you'd be blown away by what we learn when we just listen to what they have to say about themselves, particularly officers who come from communities that have a lot of problems with law enforcement, and they love their community and they love the officers, and they're in a bind. And they feel that everywhere they turn, they're hated. So there's a toxic environment within the agency as well as in the community. And then coming home, you don't feel like you want to dump it on your spouse. You don't really feel like you can talk to your parents about it. There's nowhere to go. And it's an extraordinary burden that folks feel. I mean, generally speaking, I think folks have joined the force because they want to protect and serve. I really believe that on some deep level. It's a noble profession that I don't think begins with people misbehaving, but I think very quickly it becomes overwhelming. And there are some maladaptive ways that people deal with the overwhelm. And that overwhelm comes in all directions. It's not just, the sort of the physical threat. It's this very toxic culture inside the agencies. It's a real sense of, moral distress, as I said. Empathy fatigue. You can't really go down the rabbit hole with people that you can't help, and you watch that suffering, and you become very close to it, and you can't take it on because it'll take you down. Even this concept of pathological altruism, that folks really want to help, and they help and realize they're giving too much, and they've spent themselves, and that leads to burnout. There's so many crises around wanting to do the right thing and being stuck, either not being able to do the things they feel they should do, or being forced to do things they're told to do but know are wrong. It really creates a real pretzel inside, and gets folks in places that are really difficult to understand and talk about. And unless you are sitting with your peers, unless you trust a group of folks, who have your back, who are with you in your unit, unless the agency has normed this, there's no resource. There's been a movement in policing for peer support, which is essentially other officers coming to work with you when there's a critical incident and there's been damage or trauma. But this is after the fact, and frankly, it's too little, too late. There isn't training in the academies, and there isn't a culture within the agencies that give folks space to talk about the difficulties, the overwhelm, and even the triumphs and the things that you're kind of excited about, because there's nowhere to turn really for a lot of these officers. So just the benefit of coming together in this way and owning your own little huddle, and having the opportunity to show up once a week. This is coupled with a lot of material and curriculum that we give them. Every week we send them an assignment that's a podcast or that's, a video or an article, and then a mindfulness practice, something they can do, and then a writing assignment. And then they come into their little huddle and they've got a bunch of material to talk about with regard to sleep, or the food they eat, or the way they have experienced gratitude, the way they've expressed gratitude or felt like, it's been expressed to them. There's so many aspects of listening, of awareness, and we take them through a 3-month, really robust curriculum where we ask them to think of these things and then create this, as I said before, this structure of belonging, this council huddle, where they have an internal resource for being able to unpack this, to learn from their peers, maybe to say some things and to speak about some stuff that wouldn't normally be spoken of. And that resource becomes, something that they protect and benefit from, much like the folks inside prisons. And you're right, it's difficult for the public to understand what they go through. And you have all kinds of opinions about that. We project onto them a whole lot of stuff because of the uniform they wear. We don't usually get a chance to hear their real story. And sometimes when you do, it's overwhelming, it's heartbreaking, it's inspiring, it's amazing. And I feel very privileged to know some officers pretty intimately, having sat in council with them, and get to see them in ways that you wouldn't normally think would reveal themselves with somebody who looks like that and walks around like that. But just, hearing an officer talk about, a pet bunny that their kid brought home that they adopted and now sleep with, cuddled up with, and watching the way that kind of inspires stories in others. And all of a sudden there's a whole quality, there's a whole spectrum of character that you've seen in that person because they shared a story that they wouldn't normally have shared, and you see them differently and you feel differently about them. And I think that you bring these qualities of really speaking authentically and being able to listen without judging, when you've been doing this, you bring that to the community. And while I never recommend starting with a group, that is so mixed, in which you have, a sense of, antagonism that's so fresh and trying to go deep in that kind of way, I think that very quickly something emerges where a curiosity about the other is present, and you start to ask questions and you begin to think, oh gosh, that person has a story. There's a little bit of a, there, but for the grace of God go I. It could have been me who, was the person I arrested if things had gone differently, or, I grew up with somebody that looked a lot like you. And there's a lot of capacity for empathy that is revealed that takes a little while to get to, but it's there, and I'm confident in it, and I'm really grateful and inspired that I have gotten to see so much of it. I think that this will really transform the experience of a lot of police officers as we continue to roll it out around the country. And I really appreciate the Department of Justice embracing this as a way to bring more resources to more officers who critically need it. And again, as I said, I think all first responders could benefit.
Yes. Yeah, definitely. It's wonderful that you've been able to get that personalized perspective. And yes, watch the video. I watched the video. It was definitely eye-opening, and you finally, not that I didn't, I guess I've always, because I grew up in a home with first responders from on the medical side. So, they interacted with police officers a lot because, people get in accidents and end up in the hospital. And so, but getting to see that human side of how, their families deal with things, how, they're away from their children a lot, how, they have to process these different, tragedies that happen to the different families that they run into, and how these families, expect them to be kind of the pillow to cry on, essentially. And, and I'm speaking to that, being that, I was a child of first responders that dealt with medical conditions. So I know, in my family that, parents would get pulled out. You might be in the midst of a birthday party or some other kind of, fun family event. And then, mom or dad has to go run to the hospital to go take care of whatever situation. So they are taking time out of their own lives then to, deal with these situations in ways that a lot of people don't know.
I have to say, Anne-Marie, I got to jump in. My wife is a physician, and her experience of physician burnout and the extraordinary overwhelm, doctors and nurses for sure, is it's really tragic. But there's something really destructive, I think. I think physicians realize it, and the majority recommend that their children do not follow them into that profession because of what they have experienced. The numbers are really terrifying about, their own personal experience. But, we have noticed this extraordinary decline in medical professionals' ability to actually listen to their patients. There are times when a patient telling their story, I think that there's some studies in a book called Compassionomics, which are really extraordinary, that patients need 17 seconds to really get the word out about their story. They need to be listened to for that long. And physicians get up to 11 seconds, and that's it. And at 11 seconds, they're unable to listen anymore. They just move on to the next thing. And just the capacity to develop sitting and settling and listening to your patient for another 6 seconds, generally, and of course, it varies, but that's just a number. But it's understandable that we have to depersonalize at a certain point. We have to disconnect because it's just too much. And that's so dangerous to our humanity, our health, and also to the quality of care that is offered when caregivers are just unable to sustain that level of compassion in these overwhelming jobs. There's something that needs to happen to give them resources to be able to show up and to not have depersonalized so much that they're completely disconnected. Just to get through their day and be able to get home and return to the birthday party that they missed and that they resent missing. It's really there's an enormous need.
Yes, and indeed, yeah, it's just it's even funny that you say that because I had a baby over the pandemic. And all my doctors quit being regular doctors. Every doctor that I had, and that was about 3 of them, they all said, I'm going a different route in life. I got their letters.
Yeah.
The pandemic definitely, took its toll, as we all know, on the medical staff. They were just like, this is, this virus is crazy. My own life is at risk. My family is, chaotic at home because I have to do all the same things as everybody else. So yes, we are in a period of, I would say still like last year, I looked at trauma, but I would say, because it was so mind-boggling, I think that definitely the traumatic experience still continues for people in their mind.
Yeah, for sure.
The other thing that I wanted to talk to you about is that recently you've been working with also, you have your power training program, but now you're even part of the U.S. Government and looking at, our total system, right? Because after everything that's happened, everybody's like, we're in trouble. Yes, we were in trouble before, but it became very apparent. And so I think that's exciting that you've been asked to take part of this because it's a whole different approach, I think, than they've taken in the past. If you want to speak a little bit about what you're doing.
Well, I think, we've come to a point where we realize something needs to happen differently. Systems are really dehumanizing in so many ways. And I think that, politics is certainly an area that causes all kinds of anxiety for all kinds of reasons. We understand that things happen slowly, but as I mentioned, the Surgeon General, Vivek Murthy, that office is doing some extraordinary work, and I'm thrilled to be partnering with them in some ways to try to bring forward the critical need to look at this epidemic of loneliness and isolation. I think that's what the Surgeon General is really pushing out, along with a couple other initiatives, but that in particular. And I think it's really resonating what it means in terms of policies and funding opportunities, and an openness to programs like ours is really helpful, frankly, because as as an executive director of a nonprofit organization, my job is to find resources and make sure there's more opportunity. I mean, I understand the need for this. I see the extraordinary transformation in the lives of individuals in schools like the one my daughter went to, and in police agencies and units where, the reports are things are functioning at a whole different level because of the integration of some real humanizing practices. Amidst all this sort of diversity, equity, inclusion talk, at its core, folks really need to be valued and seen. They need to be met where they are to some extent, whether you're in a big corporation or a school or an agency, and having some opportunity built into these structures that give them the chance to really take a look at their own personal experience and have that be something that is valued, is transformative. So I appreciate our friends on the federal level and on the state level who have seen the value in this. I hope that will continue. I also I'm really interested in building more relationships with the foundations that fund us and individuals who see a resonance in this. And so we're always looking to build that. One of the things that has emerged for us is that while, you and I can talk about what counsel looks like and sitting in a circle and, passing a talking piece or talking one at a time and all that, it really is, it's not the most important thing to talk about here. It's really the impact of this work. And so we are really shifting our focus towards this idea of what happens when we start doing this kind of work. We allow ourselves to see our community as rich. We value diversity. We understand that beyond this notion of us versus them, there is an ability to function in a way that is respectful and civil and leads to a kind of a flourishing that we desperately need. And it's not the direction that we're heading in many ways, but it's something that can be corrected and combated with things like counsel and mindfulness and listening and understanding more about the critical value of social connection. Humans are wired for that, but we become more and more isolated over time. And knowing that social connection is essential to our long-term survival, as essential as food and water, is something that I think we've lost sight of. And that what we do significantly improves the health and well-being, not only of individuals, but it lowers the risk of premature, mortality and death and physical outcomes and mental outcomes and all kinds of things. This is an incredible moment to amplify this message of going beyond us and them. We have an initiative. It is part of our transition to talk about that. The initiative is just that, beyond us and them, and it becomes an aspiration to live in a world where we don't get stuck in a silo and start hating on the other, where we value the opportunity to tell our authentic story, to be authentic, and to be attentive to others, to pay attention, and to really develop the capacity to settle and listen without judgment. And that these qualities are planting seeds for the world we want our kids to grow up in and for generations to come. And it's resisting this trend to move towards isolation and fear and resentment. The poet Rumi has a wonderful poem called The Great Wagon, which is quoted a lot, and it's where this phrase, beyond us and them comes from. And he talks about out beyond ideas of wrongdoing and right doing, there's a field and I'll meet you there, and goes on to talk about that ideas and language and even the phrase each other doesn't really make any sense when we sit in that field and we recognize that we are profoundly interconnected and we need to find a way to coexist in order to get through it, in order to make the world a place we want our kids to grow up in. So our sort of focus now is on what it means to talk about beyond us and them, what it means to have these programs available to schools and law enforcement, inside prisons and rehabilitative programs for first responders, and even, as I said, in businesses where the corporate culture has become toxic and folks just don't want to come into work anymore. And certainly when folks learn this, they want to run out and do it with their families. They have all kinds of ideas like, gosh, I could sit around and do a council with my kids or with, the uncles and the aunties who are, always so irascible. There's something about having the chance to give everybody, a few moments to say where they are and feel respected and listened to that really is, it's such a healthy and critical practice for us all to learn and to look for ways we can integrate it to make the world a more healthy and flourishing place. We have to do this work now. It's critical, and my job is to go out there and figure out how to grow it and sustain it and make sure there are resources so that it's not just the amount of folks we can reach, but that it's something folks learn from and are inspired by and can take out into the world in all kinds of places that are in need.
You get me thinking in so many different ways that, this is, just kind of a recap, that about being able to listen to people and, not have to, I guess, the need to be right doesn't have to be there. Just listen.
Mm-hmm.
Hearing out
Exactly.
there's the story without judgment, because that's the big thing right now in our lives is everything has a judgment on it already, even before you say it.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And then, understanding, I guess, understanding and dealing and being okay with the level of stress that you might be facing as a first responder type of person. Because I think, at least this is my, the way that I grew up, is that the first responders, in a way, see themselves a little bit in a superhero type of mode. And what I mean about that is that superheroes, when you see them, on, in a movie or whatever, you don't ever really see them have like a breakdown or a problem, right? But also superheroes tend to be not really human, right?
Right. Right.
Right,
Exactly.
they're like aliens,
Exactly.
and have been like fallen into some some toxic sewage that changed them, so they're not really human, right?
Right. Right.
So
Right.
that's the
Exactly.
thing that we have to remember, that you're not really, you still are human. You just have this role that you have taken on. And not to forget about that. And so, I want to take this as a larger level globally, because, I know you have not only been working in the US, you've done things abroad. And so, in kind of wrapping this up and closing, what would you say as a society that we need to, I guess, really understand about ourselves in order to, I guess, transcend all of these issues? This is a big one. I feel like this is, one of those, what is it, essay that could go on for like 50,000 pages, right? So, because everything that you're saying, and the reason I'm asking you that question, it really comes down to each individual, right? And so, what would you say, I guess, is going to be like that message that you would like to get across to everyone of what they can do? Because we can't change other people. That's the one thing I've learned in life. You can't change another person, so you have to worry about changing yourself. So what should we be focusing on?
Yeah, I think, the wisdom is in that question. If you unpack it, I think I appreciate it very much. I think people often misquote Gandhi and say, be the change you want to be. I think the larger quote is, if we could change ourselves, the tendencies in the world would also change. And then I think it goes on to say that as a man changes his own nature, so does the attitude of the world change around him. And we need not wait until we see what others do. I think that is the place where we do our work. I think that compassion begins when we allow ourselves to really hear and attune to suffering, that of others and that of ourselves. We can't leave ourselves out of that. And I think really dropping in and bearing witness, hearing and perceiving the anguish that we feel around us, we're moved to do something about it. And I think that's where compassion is different than empathy or sympathy or pity, is that we move beyond that to include action that is considered and skillful and that is beneficial. And that may be small action we take as we take care of ourselves, or a small act of kindness that we offer a person or an animal or the planet. I think as we begin to understand the critical importance of paying attention to the current moment, the present moment, on purpose, without judging it, which is kind of the definition of mindfulness, then I think we are putting ourselves in a position where we can be agents of change. We can be vessels for compassion to emerge. And these are, I think, the building blocks of compassion and making the world a better place. And I think it begins with us. It begins with a mind of curiosity and openness, a willingness to take a backward step and really pay attention. And I think as we do that, we recognize that there's some extraordinary qualities, some innate human goodness that sometimes we take for granted in ourselves and in others. And in celebrating that and really attuning to that, I think we become very powerful, and we become able to, I don't know if we're leaping tall buildings at a single bound, but there's certain things about the superhero image that I like, Anne-Marie, I got to say. I think that there's a quality of superpower that comes from being able to become that next version of ourselves and see in others the potential to transform from what we thought was there to something really meaningful and beautiful. It takes slowing down. A practice like counsel is incredibly helpful if you have access to it, or you want to go read the book, or we have online counsels where folks can just sort of drop in for 90 minutes and see what that's like. I think more and more of these kind of practices can be incredibly helpful in our personal lives, in our work life, in society. But it really does begin with us as an individual, and how it is we really take the time to drop in and listen and bear witness to it all. And it doesn't end with noticing and hitting a like on Facebook or Instagram. It requires us to really think about, okay, now that we recognize something, we recognize the need, what are we going to do about it? What action are we going to take now? Where's our resolve to do something, a small thing? That switch that we turn on there, I think, changes everything. It changes us internally, but it also changes the world. That's my story, and I'm sticking to it.
I like the answer. Thank you so much for your time today, Jared, and for the insights that you have brought to us. I hope this helps people who are not only first responders, but everyone to get a different perspective of, what we are dealing with, how to move forward, and that it's, your story is important, and listening to other people's stories are also important, because, we're a bunch of stories creating one big story, essentially.
Mm-hmm. Exactly.
Yes. So thank you, Jared, for your time and insight. If you'd like to learn more about Jared, you can go to centerforcounsel.org. If you have a passion for an unserved community, a social justice problem, or simply want to change minds, contact Project Good Work at projectgood.org to start your project of change today. We'd like to send our deepest gratitude to our ongoing show supporter, Blair Chapman. Subscribe to our mailing list at projectgood.work/subscribe to get our episodes and blog articles sent to you each month. Plus, get a 10% discount on any project you start with projectgood.work. As part of our Project Good Changemaker community, sign up today at projectgood.work. To our listeners, thanks for tuning in to Project Good, where we're focused on what matters.